President Trump is visiting the Middle East this week. He's in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. He's also announced that he's ending sanctions on Syria. And I want to know, is that good or bad? Shalom, I'm Mark Regev, and I'm here with my co-host Ruthie Blum for another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm good, Mark. A little apprehensive, I'll admit. There are so many things going on right now. So let's start with President Trump's visit to the Middle East. We all saw he gave a very lengthy speech in Saudi Arabia. There were hundreds of people in the audience. It was a real warm bath to Mohammed bin Salman, MBS as we call him, where he announced all kinds of amazing deals, trade deals, that the Saudis are going to invest tons of money in the United States, and the United States is going to, in exchange, allow to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, etc. But in the course of that speech, there were many interesting developments, some positive and others what I thought were negative. And not so much about Trump, but here's the thing. In Israel, we've been talking about the October 7th massacre, that what led up to it was our false conceptia, as we call it. And one element of that conceptia is that money and affluence and trade, that they bring peace. And we sadly have been again and again proven that that is absolutely not true. So the question is, which countries, yes, where it matters, and which ones don't. For example, he also said he's going to take off the sanctions on Syria now that the Assad regime fell, maybe not noticing that al-Julani, the new head of Syria, is a jihadist in a tie. So, what do you think about that?
So first of all, it's clear that the president, and that's why he got elected, is prioritizing economic issues. And he wants to, for want of a better phrase, bring home the bacon for the American voters and do trade deals and investment deals that are good for America. And it's clear that he sees he's going to three rich Gulf, in the old days, you probably can't say this today, oil sheikdom, so to speak, countries that have got a lot of money to invest, and he wants their money to invest in the United States. He wants economic cooperation with them. He wants trade with them. And I think that's an important part of his visit. I heard a figure that if you take all the deals that were signed while he was in Saudi Arabia or were talked about, I don't know if they were 600 billion. Trillion.
There's trillions going in there.
Okay. And so it's a huge sum of money, and that's part of the Trump agenda, yes, to bring money to the United States, to bring investment to the United States, to bring jobs back to the United States. That we understand. As an Israeli, so the U.S. has better ties with Saudi Arabia and stronger ties, I've got no problem with that. I think that's wonderful. I was worried there was this story before he arrived on the Reuters network, the Reuters wire, that said that the Americans were going to give, amongst all this package with Saudi Arabia, they're also going to give a nuclear reactor for civilian energy. And here I started to think a moment, could this indirectly not be good for Israel? Why? The president has said, and he said it in his speech, he wants to expand the Abraham Accords. And you've got to have sweeteners in the deal for the Saudis to normalize relations with Israel. And if you give too much upfront and not in the framework of normalization, I think in many ways, are you closing the door inadvertently on normalization? And that's a fear I have. I don't know if it's a justified fear or an unjustified fear. I'm just concerned that if the Saudis think they can get everything from the United States without normalizing ties with Israel, does that lower their level of motivation to make the deal? On the Syrians, I'm also skeptical like you are. I don't think the new Syrian regime, obviously they're being very careful because they're weak and they've got internal challenges and they've got external challenges, so maybe they're saying the right things. But I heard a senior administration official, Washington, yes, and a Trump administration official a few days ago just say that the new Syrian government seems to have links with all sorts of jihadist terrorist organizations and that they're actually giving Syrian passports to non-Syrian terrorists who are connected with them, and there were these difficult signs. And so I urge caution with Syria, with U.S. relations with Syria. If the new regime turns out to be a blessing, I'll be very pleasantly surprised. But I think you have to have carrots and sticks. And I think it's maybe you have to move incrementally if they move in the right direction so you can move towards them. But just to give too much up front, I'm not saying that's happened, but this would be my concern. If you give too much up front without getting something in return, this regime will have a lower incentive to change its evil ways.
Okay, so first of all, I'll take issue with one thing you said. You said as an Israeli. Now, I would say I'm an Israeli. I also have American citizenship. I would say forget about as an Israeli. All right, America first, and America, prosperous America, and making deals. That's wonderful. Okay, when you do it with the wrong regimes, you're in big trouble, because let's talk about another state, Qatar. Now, even President Trump knew he has said in the past, Qatar has infiltrated many countries, the United States, universities. It throws its money around. It buys influence in very dangerous ways. And it's now gifting President Trump an airplane, Air Force One backup or something. It is very dangerous. Qatar is an evil regime. Qatar is behind Hamas. Qatar, who's playing mediator for the hostage releases, is the one in the first place that funded Hamas in order to take the hostages. It's outrageous. But President Trump did know that, because we have him on record as warning about Qatar in his first term. So I'm concerned about Qatar more than even Saudi Arabia. Now, I'll say what is interesting is if the carrot, I'm all for carrots and sticks. So the one thing you could say is that though he's lifting sanctions on Syria, he can always reimpose them. If he's making a deal with Saudi Arabia or anybody else, he can reverse it. Now, those are the carrots and the sticks. It's possible that the incentive not to lose a benefit will help these countries not attack the West in the way, because you see, it's not an Israeli issue. I think that's a big mistake. And I know that the isolationists in the Trump administration say, oh, for Israel, Israel, Israel. No, this is an American interest. Now, we got to talk about Iran. We now know for some reason that the Saudis suddenly don't want Iran to be bombed. And we know that President Trump is negotiating with the Iranian regime. Now, the good part is he said to them, look, you dismantle all your nukes, either by yourselves or we're going to do it for you, and not so nicely. Right? However, again, any deal you sign with Iran can't be trusted. So that right now there's all this delicate stuff going on, and there is nothing wrong with his wanting to have trillions poured into the United States. But it does matter if they're bad actors and the money is going to pernicious causes, as Qatar has been doing in every university in America they've been infiltrating, and this is a real concern.
So I agree with you on the Qatari issue, and it's not just an American issue, it's a global issue. The Qataris were bribing European politicians. The Qataris have got small country, endless amounts of money, and they are buying influence. There's all these reports of how they got the World Cup soccer championship a few years ago by spreading a lot of money around with different officials. And we've got stories in Israel of Qatari buying, which we still have to see what happens with them. But Qatar is interested in boxing above its weight, so to speak, and they do so by spreading their money around, and it's a problem. And these are Qatar, like Turkey, is hand in glove with the Muslim Brotherhood and with Islamic extremism, and there's issues there. There are issues there that cannot be ignored. Al Jazeera, which just spurs out anti-Semitic material, anti-American material, yes. Al Jazeera, which has been a strategic problem. Incitement to violence, incitement for terrorism. It is Hamas's news station of choice, yes. Every time we've had a previous round of fighting with Gaza, they have a ceremony where Hamas gives Al Jazeera an award for their wonderful coverage, right? And yet this is a 100% Qatari-funded venture, which is reaching tens of millions of people across the Arab world in a very negative way. So we should have no illusions about Qatar. And I'm glad to hear from you that you say that President Trump has no illusions about Qatar either. On the other issue, I mean, we spoke briefly about the Saudi visit. We spoke about Qatar now. There's also an issue here, President Trump, and the issue of the Houthis. And we spoke last week, we recorded last Wednesday, and as we got home, we heard that about this ceasefire now with America and the Houthis. And today, in the last 24 hours, we've had 2 Houthi missiles on Israel, both of them intercepted. But maybe for many Israelis, I don't know, a certain disappointment that the ceasefire deal between the United States and the Houthis continues, nevertheless, to allow the Houthis to shoot their rockets into Israel.
Now, see, I know we've been hearing a lot of reports about Israel was really disappointed or shocked by the fact that President Trump agreed to the Houthis, said, "Okay, stop firing on us, and we'll stop attacking U.S. ships in the Red Sea." Now, I think that's nonsense. As long as President Trump, and I don't think he's going to do it, as long as President Trump does not stop Israel from fighting its own battles against the Houthis, as you know, when they attacked our airport, etc., and we did. As long as he doesn't stop us from doing it, that's fine. It doesn't matter whether it's okay for Trump to say, "Okay, you stopped firing on our ships. We're going to stop bombing you." That's okay. But I will say, we were just mentioning Qatar, okay? Now, it's a little hard for us to criticize others for dealing with Qatar when right now an Israeli delegation is in Doha negotiating another hostage release. Now, what we saw in the last 2 days was the release, thanks to the Trump administration, with the help of Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Special Envoy Adam Bowler, and I have my criticisms of them, but the fact is Idan Alexander, an Israeli-American, was finally released from Hamas, brutal Hamas captivity after 584 days, and he arrived home. Now, the issue of the Israeli delegation in Qatar, there also to meet with other officials, is that Israel is giving one last chance in the next, I believe it's 72 hours, to see if we can rescue any more hostages from Gaza before launching what we've called chariots, Gideon's chariots, a huge renewed ground operation in Gaza. And so, again, it's all very delicate here. So I have to say it's a little hard to call out people for dealing with Qatar when everybody's dealing with
Including Israel.
Including Israel.
If you mention the soldier, Idan Alexander, first of all, this is a young man who grew up in the United States, born and grew up in the United States in New Jersey.
No, he was born in Israel.
Sorry.
To Israeli parents. And they're still Israeli, but he grew up in New Jersey. Yes.
Correct. I accept the correction. And yet, unlike a lot of, Israelis who live abroad, this guy, and no legal obligation to do so, comes back to Israel, volunteers for military service in the Golani Brigade, which is one of the, toughest army units that there are. And he's a combat soldier. And a guy like that who, he could have been, on some party campus in the United States just having a good time. He comes to Israel and volunteers for army service, and you saw how the whole country reacted to him and his release, and we all hope that many more will be released. And it'll be interesting to see in the next few days, and I don't think it's more than days, are we going to a major military operation in Gaza, or are we going into a new hostage release timeout? And the government says, well, if we can get the hostages out, we're willing to do the timeout. We'll have to see it. Ultimately, the ball is in the court of Hamas. They will have to decide, do they want war or do they want to have temporary peace and quiet by getting out the hostages? I would add the following, that Israel targeted, apparently successfully, though it's not 100%, the military leader of Hamas, Mr. Sinwar, but this guy is Mohammed Sinwar, not his brother, who was the leader of Hamas, who we took out a few months ago, Yahya Sinwar. And I think the combination of military pressure and being very committed to using military force if we need to, together with diplomatic pressure, which the Americans are helping us provide, that is the key to future hostage releases.
Well, we hope so, but don't kid yourself. It's not all the hostages will be released. Hamas says it has to stay in power and Israel has to leave Gaza and then things go back to October 6th. No way. What is possible is that they'll release some of them and then in exchange for a 6-week ceasefire or whatever it is, okay? In any case, anybody who believes now what we're seeing is there are Israelis who say, yes, we got to end the war, and bring all the hostages back. It's all well and good. It just endangers everybody else. And it encourages more hostage taking, not only by Hamas and Israel, but all over the world.
And the chief of staff of the Israeli military said a few days ago, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir said it's actually not possible. There is no such deal. The idea that suddenly that Hamas would release all the hostages, and I think we've talked about this on this program.
There is no such deal.
Why would Hamas release all its vital assets? Right, it might give a few out, but it's not going to release them all.
No, of course not. But aside from that, you mentioned, here I also have to take issue with something you said. We saw how the public reacted to Idan Alexander's release. Well, you know what? Everybody said, and we all meant it, thank God. I mean, he's such a sweetheart, and thank God, and a hero, and he was tortured. All of that's true. But, you know, all the Israeli TV studios were obsessed with, so if you have an American passport, you have President Trump help you get out of there. But what about the others who don't have other passports? It was outrageous and it was ridiculous because I'll tell you something. We saw throughout the war that anybody who was a hostage in Gaza who had also a foreign passport, there was no problem. People were out talking to Putin with hostages with Russian passports. There were there were also Thai workers in there, and the Thai government, the Philippines, but the French government, we had hostages with dual German citizenship, French, everything. Not a peep about that. Suddenly, because Idan Alexander is getting out, the hostage families, the radical ones, the really hostile anti-government protest ones, we're all suddenly screaming about how unfair it is that Idan Alexander has a U.S. passport.
So I remember when in the first months of the war, the government of Israel was assisting families of hostages with foreign citizenship to go to those governments, and we were looking for leverage over Hamas.
Of course.
Anything you can do to get someone else, that's a mitzvah.
Any life you can save in there.
Correct. And the idea that someone should be criticized for using that to get out early.
No, it wasn't that they criticized. They didn't criticize him for using.
No, but
what they did basically was criticize the Israeli government. This is what they were saying.
Yes, you're not getting.
They were saying, you see, we're Israel. Our government isn't getting us out. You need another passport. You need America to get you out. And it's baloney. It's baloney. Israel is doing everything it can to get everyone out. First of all, most of them we have gotten out. Second of all, Prime Minister Netanyahu is being so careful and negotiating again and again and again with those monsters and their backers in Doha that's the reason we haven't won the war yet. It's the reason our soldiers are getting killed in Gaza, being careful not to endanger the hostages and to give more opportunity for releases. And the protest movement saying that about the U.S. passport, what they're saying is, see, our country doesn't help us. And by the way, Idan Alexander's parents, now, as you pointed out, he grew up in New Jersey, but he decided he wanted to come to his homeland and serve in the army. And his mother said, and now we're all going back to New Jersey. I mean, they were in New Jersey. They came on an airplane to greet him in Israel when he got released, that he's returning to New Jersey. It was also a message saying, you see, Israel abandoned us. And it doesn't make sense that Idan himself feels that way because he got up, even though his parents left Israel and went to live in America. Idan himself came back to Israel in order to join the army. And unfortunately, he was met with October 7th and, the barbarians kidnapped him. But this business of, okay, now he's returning to New Jersey, I think is another message saying Israel betrayed us. And I am very upset about that message that the Israeli media, of course, foreign ones also, they have been pounding, and it is, in my opinion, disgusting.
Another issue that's been in the media this week, Israeli media and other places as well, is the fact that Trump's on his first visit to the Middle East, and he's going to Saudi Arabia, he's going to Qatar, he's going to the UAE, and as we said before, primarily a business agenda. But should Israel be offended, question, that he's not coming here? And in his first term, his first visit to the region, he went to Saudi Arabia, and then he came straight to Israel. He wanted to balance. Now, the argument is, of course, that he saw Netanyahu first among every foreign leader, and he saw Netanyahu a second time. And which foreign leader has seen Trump twice? I don't think there's anyone, right? And so they're saying the Israelis have got enough attention. But nevertheless, it might only be pomp, it might only be protocol, it might only be visual images. But I would have preferred that if he's in the Middle East and he's talking about a new Middle East and he's talking about, building skyscrapers and making this region successful, it would have been nice if he'd also come to Israel. You wouldn't have liked to have seen him here as well?
No, I actually, in this case, I thought that was really clever of him not to come here. And I'll tell you why. I've heard people compare this to Obama. When President Obama was elected, the first country he went to in the Middle East was Egypt. He gave a whole speech honoring the Muslim Brotherhood and didn't come to Israel. All right, that was different. And said, I'm reaching out to the Arab world. He also said he wanted daylight between Israel and America. Here, I think is a very different thing. And it's not just because Netanyahu visited the White House visited Trump twice and he's on the phone with him all the time. No, I think this was actually a clever move on Trump's part. And that is the last thing Israel wants is the choir whisper, singing in Trump's ear that everything he's doing is on behalf of the Jewish state. It is not. We're an ally. This trip he did say in his speech, he mentioned that it would be doing him a favor if the Saudis would agree to join the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords only are normalization with Israel. That's why it was called Abraham, the sons of Abraham. Now, he mentioned it, but I think it's excellent that he said, no, this right now, I'm following U.S. interests. Israel is one of them. I mean, after all, Witkoff was here and the Bowler was here. It's not that no American was here and that he made a big deal. He also mentioned in his speech in Saudi Arabia about the release of Idan Alexander. I think at this moment, it's just as well. There's such a thing as a bear hug. There's also that we don't want. But we also, because, again, this is, I think, part of our alliance. We're showing that there are shared interests. They're not identical. We're on the same page about the goals. Maybe we can't get there the same way. And Trump has to show everybody that what he's doing and whatever friends he has, it's not because of Israel. It's not Israel's fault. It's not in order to appease Israel. And I said, that's why I'm glad he didn't come.
So in his speech in Saudi Arabia, he also referred to the Iranian nuclear issue. And he once again restated the American position, which is if we can get a negotiated deal that dismantles the Iranian nuclear program, that's good. And if we can't, they'll be held, I'm not using his words, but basically there'll be military action. And we've been following very closely different words from the administration, and you've expressed a skepticism here that is it possible to get a good deal with Iran? You think the Iranians will never agree?
I say you can't.
You can't. and so the point here is I think a lot of Israelis are watching also what happens with these negotiations. Do the Iranians really negotiate seriously? Is it possible? And to what extent to get a deal does Trump compromise? Because on the issue of nuclear enrichment, and I want our viewers and listeners to understand this, there are many countries on the planet that have nuclear power for energy, for peaceful purposes. But none of them, not one who is not already a nuclear power, has enrichment. You only need enrichment if you want weapons, your own enrichment. Otherwise, you buy your own nuclear fuel. And I think this is a red line that can't be crossed. Unfortunately, the administration has given different messages, and we haven't seen the president being unequivocal. We've heard people in the administration We heard Witkoff once say he'll accept low levels of enrichment.
No, and
And then he turned it back and said no enrichment. But have we heard those words from the president unequivocally? I'm not sure.
Well, we have, but then he's said a couple of different things, and we have to see what he does. But here's another thing. You know, nuclear weapons aren't our only problem with Iran. What about all its ballistic missiles, its surface-to-air missiles, its cruise missiles? You know, nuclear weapons aren't the only problem when you have an evil regime like that. And as I've said all along, I am not expecting the United States to fight anybody's battles, although Iran may be talking to President Trump. But I don't know if he's noticing that the Ayatollahs are screaming death to America and trampling on Trump's face and the American flag while they're doing this, okay? And he also knows they made an assassination attempt on his life, more than one. So I don't know what is going to happen with that, and I don't believe in any deals with Iran, and I only hope that Israel will take action. Maybe we are already taking actions. We see all kinds of explosions going on in Iran, and maybe we already are. We don't know. I don't know if it's Israel, but my only hope, and I also believe it to be true about Trump, that if we have to do something in our interests, he will not prevent us. He will not sanction us for doing it. He will not prevent us from doing it.
First of all, if you want to learn from history, which is not necessarily a good direction to understand the future, but from history, when Israel took out the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, we were condemned by the United States. And Ronald Reagan, who was the president at the time, was a friend of Israel. He just thought it conflicted with American interests. So it's not impossible. You say you're convinced that Trump will allow us to do whatever we need to do. On that issue, I hope it's true. I hope it's true.
Well, he might not after he signs some deal that'll be a bogus deal with Iran.
So you are concerned?
No, I'm concerned. Well, first of all, there are other areas here.
Okay.
For example, the Houthis in Yemen.
Yep.
If we go after, I'm
I don't think
convinced
it stops there.
he will not stop.
No, that's correct.
In Syria, when they're slaughtering Druze, I mean, he may be making friends with this new regime in Syria, but we have interest. Syria is on our border. It's not on,
US
it's not on the Hudson River over there. Okay, so that's the issue. Can we? Also, we have to make sure that none of the weapons that were in Assad's palace get into the wrong hands, etc. The same thing with Lebanon. He also said, the Lebanese people, it's wonderful, but we still see Hezbollah. We haven't completely defeated Hezbollah. We're finding more weapons, more terrorists, etc. That's what I was talking about, that he won't stop us from protecting our interests. Now, where Iran is concerned, that it depends.
It's on the deal.
But
if there
it could be that we'll have to do everything covertly, the way we're doing. I don't know. But if a deal is signed, then it is true that a window's closing for us. And I've said that all along, and I don't think that's President Trump's fault or Prime Minister Netanyahu's fault. I think that it is a very tricky situation.
Can I say on this point, you said before that he heard from the Saudis they're against an American strike on Iran,
or
for that matter, any strike.
I don't think he's...
And here I would be very cynical. I would say the following. Of course, the Saudis will say that publicly. Of course, the Saudi foreign ministry will say we're against it. But when the doors are closed and Trump speaks one-on-one with the Saudi leadership, with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who's the de facto ruler, yes, I think you'll hear something else. I think for many years, what has worried Arab leadership across the Gulf is not over American action, but the opposite, that America has acquiesced or has appeased the enemies of the moderate Arab states, who tend to also be the enemies of Israel. And Iran is the classic example, but not the only example. And so once again, when the press reports, well, it was, the Saudis are against an American military strike. Well, that's the public message. But I'll ask the following question. Do the Saudis want Israel to defeat Hamas, or do they want Hamas to win? They'll never say it, but they want Israel to defeat Hamas.
No, they definitely want all of this to be defeated. By the way, that was the Abraham Accords. One of the key reasons was this is an anti-Iran axis. And what is an anti-Iran axis? It's also anti-Muslim Brotherhood, anti-Hamas, etc. And by the way, They also pay lip service to some Palestinian statehood. They all say behind closed doors. They don't, not only do they not care about whether there's Palestinian statehood, they don't want Palestinians coming into their countries. Okay, they don't want it, but they have to say it. I don't know why they have to, but they do. Right? Let's say they have to say it. The thing about the Saudis is I think that they were hoping for a very swift Israeli victory over Hamas and got disappointed that it was dragging out that way. One of the things that our Arab neighbors, they have a different culture from ours, which, by the way, Trump did mention in his speech. And he said, unlike, he tried to criticize, unlike the neocons or whatever, we don't believe that we need to impose our culture on you. Okay, fair enough, right? As long as their culture doesn't kill us, that's fine. However, this business of, for example, having hostages whose lives you have to save, I got to guarantee you that the Saudis and other Arab states find that peculiar or weak. They can, in the Middle East, our care for every single human life, including at our own expense, is viewed as weakness. So it is possible that the Saudis are thinking, well, if Israel isn't really the strong horse that we thought it was, they're hedging their bets, and now we can't have that, because that one of the reasons for the Abraham Accords was that, okay, America and Israel are the strong horses, but Israel is appearing weaker than it should.
And let me, and we've come to the end of our time, and so I'll take your point and extrapolate from it and say the following. The logic of what you're saying is, and I agree with it, of course, is that Israel defeating Hamas in Gaza and ending the rule of Hamas in Gaza, that is not only good for Israel's security and good for Israel, that's good for everyone who wants to see peace in the Middle East, because Arab-Israel reconciliation, which I think is going to happen, but that is the prerequisite for that is that Israel is strong, that Israel is a partner that the Arabs want to have, that Israel wants to live in a region where Israel is vibrant and strong and can help protect regional interests against extremists, whether they're Iran or Hamas. That is the prerequisite for peace. So actually, military victory and peace go hand in hand.
Absolutely. So before we sign off, Mark, I would like to request of our viewers, if you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe to our channel and to all JNS content. And by the way, we appreciate all your comments. We try to read all of them. We don't always get to them when there are many, but we appreciate your engagement.
So I'll see you next week, Ruthie.
Looking forward to it, Mark.